Barney Greenway is the hardest paradox to decipher in extreme metal. A quiet man with no tattoos, no drinking, no drugs, a life so disciplined he's almost invisible. Yet he possesses a roar powerful enough to shift an entire genre. No scandals, no noisy personal life, no hunger for the spotlight, and still, for more than 3 decades, he has remained the soul of Napalm Death, the strongest voice of a form of music born to defy every convention. What haunts listeners isn't just the force of that voice, but the feeling that every scream carries real pain, a distrust of authority, the imprint of a childhood scarred by bullying, the weight of growing up in a dying industrial town, and the quiet grief that shaped his life. Barney doesn't scream to shock people. He screams as if it's the only way to keep the world awake. And the less he shows off, the more enigmatic he becomes. So what in the life of a man this humble could forge a voice, powerful enough to become an icon? Let's find out. To understand where that scream was born, we have to go back to the beginning, to a working-class family in Great Bar that raised a boy with a heart far more sensitive than he ever let on. Barney Greenway was born in 1969 in a small working-class home where everything revolved around shifts at the factory, modest meals, and the quiet hope that tomorrow might be a little easier than today. His father was the definition of a laboring man, quiet, disciplined, serious about work and family responsibility. His mother was the quintessential working-class woman of that era, practical, patient, always trying to keep their home warm even as Birmingham outside sank under steel fumes and unemployment. They weren't wealthy, but there was enough love for young Barney to grow up never feeling deprived of anything that truly mattered. The one thing that carved a deep hollow in his childhood memories was the silence inside the house. Not the cold, hostile kind, but the silence of people worn down after long shifts at the factory. In that quiet, Barney learned to think more, feel more, and observe more. 3 things that later became the philosophical backbone of his entire artistic life. School, however, was another universe. A quiet kid who liked reading, who questioned everything, from social injustice to why adults kept telling children, "Don't ask too much." Barney quickly became a target. He was teased, labeled strange, pushed to the margins by people who didn't understand him. Instead of breaking, he folded inward, quietly collecting every fragment of experience to build an inner world sharper than anyone his age could imagine. His father died young. Barney was still too small to comprehend the idea of loss, but old enough to feel that something irrevocable had vanished from his life. That blow created a silent wound he rarely speaks about. Not because he wants to hide it, but because it has already shaped the way he sees the world. Fragile, unfair, and often without explanation. Amid those fractures, Barney found music. Not the popular pop or rock of the time, but punk. Raw, furious, rebellious, full of questions, crass. Dead Kennedys, Discharge. They gave him the language he never had, a way to scream the things adults kept telling him to stay quiet about. From that moment, Barney's voice began to form, not to attract attention, but to fight against the silence that had wrapped around his childhood for far too long. When punk rock became his first escape, Barney began seeking out the small stages of Birmingham as if they were his real classrooms. He stood in the crowd, not shouting, not pushing forward, just watching. He studied every movement of the band, every drum hit, every stumbling riff, and especially the way the vocalist transferred energy to the audience. He didn't treat music as entertainment. He dissected it, analyzed it, interrogated it like a living organism. Why do people scream? How can words become weapons? And what makes a scream stop being a sound and become a declaration? Sleepless nights spent with Dead Kennedys and handmade punk fanzines forged in him a pure DIY mindset. Music didn't need to be perfect. It only needed to be right. It didn't need to be beautiful. It only needed to be true. That philosophy led him to Benediction, a local death metal band where Barney first stepped onto a stage not as a spectator but as a participant. He learned how to control his breath, how to push a growl from the deepest part of his body, and, most importantly, how to turn anger into rhythm. In Benediction, Barney wasn't searching for fame. He was simply testing whether his voice could serve a purpose. Then came 1989, crashing into his life like a pivot of fate. Napalm Death, the band on the verge of defining grindcore, lost Lee Dorian after ideological conflicts. They needed a new vocalist, but not one for show. They needed a mind. And when the name Barney Greenway came up, no one thought he was the obvious choice. He didn't look like a metal frontman, had no rock star aura, and certainly didn't fit the era's standard. But the moment he opened his mouth during the audition, the debate ended. It wasn't just a scream. It was a storm coil, rough but structured, furious yet full of logic, as if every moment of his childhood and every ounce of industrial town frustration erupted in a single breath. Napalm Death realized they weren't missing a voice. They were missing a thinker. Someone who could turn grindcore from raw instinct into a movement with depth. From that moment, the band entered its second rebirth, not through new techniques, but through the intellectual discipline of a man who didn't need to be seen, only heard correctly. Harmony Corruption, 1990, Barney's first album with them, didn't just open a new chapter for Napalm Death. It etched his name into the history of extreme metal. The music became sharper, heavier, darker, with riffs and drum patterns tinted by American death metal. And, above all, Barney's voice, drilling through every limit. Behind the scenes, everything was tense. Old fans furious that the band sounded too death, internal friction tightening like a drawn bowstring, and Barney himself confronting the hardest question of his life. Was he destroying Napalm Death or saving it? The answer came only after the album dropped. Harmony Corruption climbed to the highest chart position in the band's history. Tours with Sepultura and Obituary sold out across Europe, and for the first time, grindcore was regarded as a genre with ideological weight, not just explosive noise. Barney wasn't merely standing behind a mic. He was standing at the intersection of music, protest, and the collapsing industrial world he came from. Harmony Corruption quickly became the epicenter of a quake within the extreme metal community. The dense fusion of American death metal and grindcore stunned many veteran fans. The raw, chaotic, inhumanly fast early sound of Napalm Death was suddenly replaced by tighter structures, heavier riffs, and chest-pounding drums inspired by Florida death metal. A portion of listeners called it betrayal. Others knew the band had just forged a path no one had dared to take. At the center of every argument was Barney's scream, rounded, controlled, weighted, holding each track together like the steel spine of the entire album. Attention focused on him to the point that the press began calling Barney the natural spokesperson of Napalm Death. He didn't seek that role, but no one else had the clarity or sharpness to explain why the band changed, or why grindcore needed to evolve from pure instinct to intellectual force. His political and social insight turned every interview into a serious conversation, forcing people to rethink a genre they once dismissed as noise. The subsequent tour with Sepultura and Obituary pushed Barney into another whirlwind, relentless schedules, an atmosphere like a small war every night, pressure from fans, from the media, and from inside his own mind. It was the first time both his body and his psyche showed signs of exhaustion. Each night he stood before the microphone as if burning the last of his energy. and each morning he woke up feeling pieces of himself slipping away. No one said it aloud, but everyone backstage understood something was being taken from him. Utopia Banished arrived in 1992 as a fierce reaction to all that conflict. The brutality stayed, but it grew colder, sharper, like an industrial machine cutting away everything unnecessary. The departure of drummer Mick Harris, one of grindcore's founding architects, sent shockwaves deeper than the band admitted publicly. His absence didn't just remove a unique drum style, it forced Napalm Death to confront who they were without part of the original blueprint. By 1994, Fear, Emptiness, Despair was created under entirely different circumstances. The label pushed the band toward a broader market, demanding a more accessible sound, clearer structures, even tempo adjustments toward industrial metal. Those demands created a quiet but corrosive tension that gnawed at Barney's state of mind. The album itself carried a cold, hollow atmosphere, exactly as the title suggested, as if reflecting the pressure crushing the band. Either integrate deeper into the system or step out of the game. What no one knew at the time was that Barney was carrying most of the internal fractures on his shoulders. He stood at the intersection of the label, the band, and the fans, fighting to keep the music honest while every direction pulled in conflict. Every vocal session became a battle between his instinct to rebel and his duty to keep Napalm Death alive. The pressure had never been heavier, and those brewing conflicts would soon push the band to the brink of collapse in the late 90s, a period during which even Barney had to ask himself whether his scream still had enough strength to hold everyone together. The persistence in both ideology and sound carried Napalm Death into the new decade with an energy rarely seen in bands of their longevity. Utilitarian, 2012, became the milestone that forced critics to reevaluate the band's entire journey. The album felt like a philosophical essay written in grindcore, the music frantic, but the structure as tight as a political report. A genre once dismissed as chaotic suddenly appeared systematic, layered, and even contemplative in certain moments. That year, almost every metal outlet ranked Utilitarian among the best releases, proving that Napalm Death were no longer mere survivors, they were leaders. This intellectual intensity was taken to another level with Apex Predator, Easy Meat, 2015. The Rana Plaza disaster in Bangladesh became the album's core inspiration, shaping a body of work that sounded like a warning siren for a global supply chain built on blood and sweat. Barney's screams carried the compressed fury of years spent watching a system turn human lives into cheap tools. The drums hammered like steel presses, the riffs twisted like conveyor belts, all merging into a cold, industrial landscape. The album was praised for transforming grindcore into a lens of global economic critique, something few extreme metal acts had ever pushed to such an uncompromising degree. Throes of Joy in the Jaws of Defeatism, 2020, opened an entirely new chapter. The music wasn't just brutal, it carried a deeply human sense of fracture. The songs stretched with broader structures, wider emotional range, unsettling sound layers, and quiet spaces mirroring the world's collective tension before and during crisis. Critics hailed it as a new peak, the moment Napalm Death turned grindcore into something more humane, more anguished, more aligned with real lived experience than ever before. Barney's vocals felt like he was peeling the skin off reality, exposing what society tries to bury beneath collective numbness. The post-COVID era revealed something almost unbelievable. Barney still maintained a roar powerful enough to make younger vocalists nervous. A relentless tour schedule, changing performance conditions, and rising health pressure didn't slow him down. He took the stage with a consistency that seemed impossible. The entire stretch from 2021 to 2023 became proof that grindcore is not a young person's sport. It is a sport of will. In 2024, a rare crack finally appeared in that endurance. Barney missed a performance at Mexico Metal Fest due to sudden illness, an event so unusual that fans buzzed with concern for days. His absence was a reminder that even the strongest bodies have limits, but it also exposed the sheer level of expectation the public places on him. One missing scream was enough to make an entire festival feel like it had lost its soul. Entering the new decade, his journey becomes even more compelling. An artist who has survived more than 30 years at the extreme edge of music, yet has never once lost the reason he screams. The violent scream on stage might suggest that Barney lives at the edge of emotional extremes. Yet his life off stage is a completely different story. The intensity of grindcore never bleeds into his private world. In fact, fans can barely find any trace of Barney outside of music. No social media, no backstage photos, no glittering public events, no personal updates. Silence has become the only armor he keeps for himself after decades of standing before crowds. Information about his marriage or family is almost non-existent. Some sources indicate that he has been married, yet he guards that part of his life so fiercely that all the public knows is that Barney never discusses loved ones, nor does he appear with a partner anywhere. This privacy isn't a constructed mystique. It feels more like a shield, a deliberate protection for relationships he believes should never be dragged into the machinery of the music industry. After so many years, he still lives like someone accustomed to standing alone, as though stillness is the only way to keep his identity from being eroded. Barney's lifestyle reflects an unusual discipline. A strict vegan for more than 3 decades, avoiding alcohol, cigarettes, and all stimulants, he treats his body like a tool that must remain clean, alert, and durable. Colleagues have often said that the rarest sight backstage at a Napalm death show is Barney being exhausted from excess. He never touches anything that could blur his awareness. This choice isn't tied to trends or fashionable ethics. It stems from a simple belief that the body and the voice are 2 things that deserve care. Beyond music, another world opens through shelves packed with books on history, political philosophy, and sociology. Anyone who has spoken with him shares the same impression. Barney didn't build his scream through instinct alone. It is fed by thought, by knowledge, and by a level of observation rarely found in extreme metal. That private world also includes something deeply ordinary: his love for Aston Villa. Every football season, friends always know when Barney is watching a match because his emotional intensity can rival what he shows on stage. This enthusiasm feels like a small anchor keeping him tied to everyday life amid a career defined by volatility. Despite his fierce stage presence, Barney carries a visible compassion reflected in his volunteer work with animal welfare organizations. He contributes time, raises funds, and even joins awareness campaigns for animal rights, a natural extension of his vegan lifestyle and personal ethics. Backstage stories reveal even more of who he really is, apologizing to audiences for going a bit too hard, pulling 2 arguing fans aside to calmly settle things, or politely asking crew members whether the volume might be bothering anyone. The fury of Napalm death exists only when he holds the microphone. Once he steps off stage, what remains is a gentleness almost, the opposite of the raw image the public sees. Many in the scene describe him as the kindest man in extreme metal, a title he never claims, but one that quietly grew over decades of interactions between artist and fans. His politeness appears in small moments, bowing to apologize for possibly shouting harder than necessary, or looking at a microphone as if feeling sorry for a piece of equipment forced to endure a vocal power no one else could generate. The metal community still shares humorous stories about him. Some call him a philosopher in the body of a monster because of that surreal contrast between his large frame, thunderous voice, and soft-spoken manner. Meme versions of Barney extinguishing fires with his scream or shaking the ceiling with a greeting have become part of the culture. Behind the familiar stage fury is a disarmingly humble man, one who remembers fans' names from years ago, or who stands in line for backstage access rather than using a VIP pass simply because he feels uncomfortable walking ahead of those who have waited longer. Certain inaccurate rumors circulated in the 1990s, drinking problems, violent temper, but they were quickly shut down when those who lived and worked with him repeatedly affirmed the opposite. Barney doesn't party, doesn't use intoxicants, and no one has ever seen him start a fight in real life. His steady temperament has become a defining characteristic, the perfect counterweight to the sonic chaos he unleashes through his art. Amid all the humor, however, there remains one quiet wound that Barney rarely speaks of, yet one that left a lasting mark on him: the passing of Jesse Pintado. That loss became a private grief he carried through every tour, every album, every walk onto the stage. No dramatics, no public mourning, just a silent emptiness in his eyes whenever Jesse's name comes up. A reminder of a bandmate who stood beside him during the most precarious era of Napalm death. If Barney's scream is a force of violence, then everything he preserves off stage carries a profoundly human tone: sincerity, calm, and compassion, a beautiful contradiction in a world always stereotyped as chaos. The legacy of Barney Greenway was never built on album sales or sold-out shows, but on the way he redefined the very identity of grindcore. Before Barney, the genre was seen as a chaotic, explosive experiment, extreme for the sake of extremity. After Barney, it became a form of music with ideology, with sociological perspective, with cultural weight far beyond the underground. His roar became the benchmark a whole generation of young artists measured themselves against. It was no longer enough to scream. You had to scream with a reason. The fusion of politics, philosophy, and music marked a turning point Napalm Death had never reached before. Utopia Banished, Enemy of the Music Business, Smear Campaign, Apex Predator, Easy Meat. Each album was a different chapter in the dialogue Barney opened with the world. Labor rights, human exploitation, religious control, global consumerism. Themes once foreign to extreme metal became trademarks of Napalm Death thanks to his sharp, straightforward way of expressing them. Barney's presence in the metal community feels like a spiritual backbone, unmoved by commercial trends, unwilling to bow to the market, untouched by image pressure. Record labels push too hard, he stands firm. The public doubts, he keeps going. His influence spread far beyond extreme metal. From Gojira and Converge to rising punk bands across Europe, musicians openly admit that Barney's musical ideology forced them to rethink the value of noise, of dissent, and of humanity in art. The idea of him as the kindest man in extreme metal has also become part of his legacy. His fairness toward fans, his humility around younger musicians, his absolute respect for backstage crews, these became standards younger artists learned to follow. That kindness created a protective distance between the public and the long-standing stereotype that extreme metal equals violence and apathy. For years, international media saw Barney as one of the rare voices capable of representing a genre many considered impenetrable. BBC interviews, sociology forums, contemporary art festivals, they all made space for him, not because of celebrity, but because of his critical insight. Grindcore stepped out of the shadows thanks to the way he used lyrics as socio-political reports, compressing the anxieties of the era into every frantic beat. What Barney leaves behind is not a formula, nor some unreachable myth. It is the reminder that extreme art is not a place to escape the world. It can be a mirror held to its sharpest edges, as long as the one holding the microphone dares to scream for what he believes in. For over 30 years, Barney has done exactly that. Steady, direct, unwavering. And that endurance has carved an irreplaceable imprint into the history of heavy music. Barney Greenway's presence in metal feels like an unusual beam of light. Not blinding, not loud, but steady enough to make you stop and notice what holds this entire extreme world together. His journey proves something deceptively simple, yet rarely practiced. Live honestly, think clearly, and let the music speak the rest. That weight is what makes every Napalm death stage feel like a reminder that art exists not just to entertain, but to shake the consciousness of an era. Among all the stories in extreme metal, few leave behind a sense of humanity this profound. A man who uses a scream to confront what others avoid, then walks off stage with a calmness that settles an entire backstage. His strength doesn't come from myth, but from character, something the audience can feel even when he says nothing at all. If you've seen a part of yourself anywhere in this story, leave a thought below. Share the video to spread the story of a man who turned noise into the language of compassion. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe to stay with us on the next journeys, where every artist's life is told with all the sincerity they deserve.